guys, and welcome to this week's video. This week I decided to take these two characters from my cool palette and my warm palette challenges and finally put them together in a piece. If you guys remember this video, it was quite a while ago that I did these two pieces, I think nearly a year ago now. I described them as lovers to link the two pieces together, almost as if a Romeo and Juliet-esque sort of like will they won't they sort of relationship. That's how I've always imagined them being, and I just think they're really sweet characters and I do really love the designs. So I thought it'd be really fun to revisit this. Now originally this was going to be a part of my YouTube Artist Collective. I was going to do this for the verses and have a cool versus warm palette. Unfortunately things didn't quite play out as I wanted to, and I ended up missing the deadline for this YouTube Artist Collective. So kind of think of this as my unofficial but official part of the collective, because it's like 2 weeks later and I completely missed it. That's down to time management, and as well I wasn't very well over the last few weeks, so it's, you know, stuff happens and that's absolutely fine. But either way, I really wanted to do this piece. I had this idea so cemented in my head, and I just had this really nice idea of the two colours coming together and these characters finally getting to meet. And I really wanted to do more with these and do a little bit more interesting aspects here and there. For those asking, yes, there will be prints available of this. I'll put this up on my Redbubble store as well for those who'd want alternative merch as well as prints as well. I kind of wanted to link them all together so that we'd always have these two characters almost like a Romeo and Juliet-esque sort of vibes, that they are the opposite of each other, but opposites sometimes can attract. Now the thing that's really nice about these is when you actually do put the colour palettes together, they are so contrasting to each other that to be able to blend in the in-between part was really difficult and quite a bit of a challenge. For those wondering, the equipment I'm using here, I'm using my Faber-Castell mixed media paper. I'm using a dip pen. Now this is a non-branded dip pen, and I'm going to tell you now, I did not like this one bit. I figured I'd use it for this piece because I do have my Kuretake dip pen, and at the time I couldn't quite find where I'd put it. I'd put it in a pencil case and I just couldn't find it. So I thought I'd use this off-brand one, and I just didn't like it. It just wasn't, I couldn't get it the ink to flow the way I wanted to. It kept making my ink bleed all over my paper, which was frustrating, but it happens and that's okay. You don't know something doesn't work until you try it. I'm also using my mixed media sort of approach to this, where I put down my alcohol markers, which I'm using the Winsor & Newton / Letraset Pro markers. They're the same brand, they just rebranded a while ago and I have a lot of the old brand. And I'm using a little pencil crayon on top to give texture. Now I didn't use as much pencil crayon as I originally thought because I ended up getting a lot of really nice effects from the markers by themselves. I tend to use a little bit of marker just to try and get some texture in it overall. The ink I'm using for the brown, I used Faber-Castell, I used some Dela Rowney liquid ink, and I also used, for the blue side, I used some Winsor & Newton ink on that side, as well as some off-brand drawing ink. The problem was I didn't let this layer dry enough, and what I mean by this is sometimes if you are using ink for your line work, it's best off to leave it for quite a while to dry before you actually go on top with alcohol markers. Now they are absolutely fine with alcohol markers, I know they are because I've used them for ages, but sometimes with the acrylic ink in particular, you need to let it sit for a fair few hours before you even approach anything on top of it, just so that the ink has time for it to dry and then it doesn't react with anything. And I was on a bit of a time crunch with this. Even though I didn't get this done in time for the YouTube Artist Collective, I really wanted to get this video done, and I knew this was going to take me several hours to be able to film this piece just because of the detail that I wanted. Overall, it took quite a while to do just because I did this over several evenings after work, and it was really therapeutic just to get my markers out and just do a really nice detailed marker piece. It sometimes is quite difficult for me to do bigger pieces just because I don't always have time to do bigger pieces. It's quite difficult sometimes when I'm working part-time to try and get stuff done in time for the schedule, but I don't like missing videos. It's not an excuse at the end of the day. I just really like to produce content and put the content out for you guys. I've got a lot of exciting videos that are in the works, but because they take quite a while to film, you're not going to see some of them for quite a while, and I'm really excited about some of the content that I've got coming up. I can't wait to show you guys. So when it came to colouring this, I was kind of going for a softer cell shading approach, and what I mean by this is I didn't want my cell shading to be too harsh. I was trying to make it be clear where the shadows were, but as well add a little bit more of a softer feel to it. Especially when it comes to the cool palette and the warm palettes. If you are thinking of doing this as a challenge, I highly recommend it. But with your cool palette, it tends to be a lot more pastel in tone, and then with your warm palette, it is very vibrant. The colours are very saturated, and it's you're trying not to make those colours too dull by overloading them. But at the same time, if you're using you can make a cool palette look really wonderful by using a slightly warmer tone, and you can make a warm palette look really wonderful by adding a colder tone, and that's all dependent on what kind of shading you are doing. By changing the colour of what shadows you are using, you can really change the tone of a piece. This is something that I would really love to dive in a video in the future, and if you guys would like to see this, let me know in the comment section down below. I think what's really important when it comes to colours is to try and experiment and do lots of different things that you wouldn't normally do. Now, if you had told me that I would use a lot of colour a few years ago, I probably would have laughed a little bit, because colour's never really been my strong point. I really love how colour can completely change the mood of a piece. You can really change the tonal range of a piece just by the colours that you are using. If you want a piece to be sad, you tend to use certain colder tones. If you want a piece to be happy, you tend to use warmer tones. And it's almost like how colour theory can really change a piece. And yet again, if you guys would like a video on this, let me know in the comment section down below. It's always interesting to see what kind of content you guys would love to see. And as well, it is pretty much most of my stuff on here does end up being speed paints. I'm trying to mix it up and make it a little bit more interesting for you by discussing stuff that I think should really be touched on when it comes to art in general. Now, a lot of this stuff that I've done over the years, I've learned. So with my markers, I know that if I colour in circles, I'm going to get a smoother approach than if I colour straight out. If you colour straight out, you're going to get a really streaky effect, whereas if you're using small little circles, you'll get making the area that you're covering quite a flatter, if that makes any sense. I hope I'm making sense. I'm probably not. But when it comes to using these two palettes, you come to understand like how the colours can completely shift in tone depending on what you are using. I think colour theory is a very interesting and very complicated thing. There's so much that you can do with colour to completely contrast and change and X, Y and Z. You can really make a piece sing by what colours you are using. With this particular challenge, it is something that I just like colouring. I'm like a kid with a colouring book. I'm just like, give me all the colours in the world now. And I think the most difficult part was the blending in the centre. And the reason why that was so difficult is because I wanted the cool and the warm to sort of meet each other, but I didn't want it to look like a gradient. I want it to look like as if where they're meeting, where their worlds are meeting, it's changing around them slowly. Like you'll notice like the sunflowers are going from warm to cold, and some of the hydrangeas are going from cold to warm, and I really want it to add that nice tonal effect where their worlds do affect each other and they are together stronger as a whole. So after I've gone on with my markers, I like to use Prismacolors or Polychromos to build up a little bit of texture on top. This just makes a piece look a little bit, it pops it a little bit more and just makes the certain colours look better. I find sometimes with markers my drawing ends up looking a little bit too flat, no matter what type of markers I use. So I find that adding little bits of texture just makes a piece look a lot more interesting. Especially with the sunflowers, by adding the pencil crayon on top, it really helps build the textures on top of there and helps create that sort of grainy effect that I was after where that piece is. Afterwards, I'm using a little bit of white gel pen. This is just to make certain areas pop, to bring highlights, bring out the eye shines in, and just add general texture where I need it. And this was the aftermath. Look at this desk, how messy it ended up being. There's so many colours that end up being used on these two pieces. It's quite funny to see it all laid out on the desk. I always like tidying up after an art piece, it feels very therapeutic. And here is a few final looks on this piece. I hope you guys really do like this, and I hope this video is giving you a little bit of food for thought. And if you do have any suggestions for content you would like to see, let me know in the comments section down below. I'm always interested and excited to see what you guys think. This piece is going to go up on my Redbubble, so I'll leave a link for you to check out there. And I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Maybe subscribe if you're new. But as always, folks, stay creative.